Thanks for coming out tonight. For those of you that don't recognize me or know me, my name's Matt Strawn. I see some familiar faces in the room from my time as chairman of the Republican Party here in Iowa. Currently, I serve as a national advisor and a member of the Iowa Board of Advisors to Americans for Peace, Prosperity, and Security. And it is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that is devoted to making sure the next Commander-in-Chief of the United States is prepared from day one to inherit a series of threats unlike our nation has ever seen. And just looking out at this room tonight on a Friday night, with as much going on in everyone's lives, the fact that you are here represents the best of the Iowa caucuses. We have this incredible opportunity and privilege of Iowans, and your presence here is a testament to not just the rest of your citizens in the state, but the country and the world, that we take that seriously. And there's no more important issue for us to be talking about right now than the security and stability of our nation abroad. And the national founder of this organization, the national chairman, a gentleman named Mike Rogers, who was chairman of the House Intelligence Committee in the United States House, the former chairman, is fond of saying, if you want to see what the world looks like with weak American leadership, just turn on your TV. Iowans understand that. Iowans understand that we cannot have prosperity here at home until we have stability abroad. So that's the purpose of the APPS presidential series. This is the 8th one that we've been privileged to do in the state of Iowa. We have done 23 in the other early states with presidential candidates, so we can really understand what their philosophies will be when it comes to America's strength, America's role in the world, and making sure, first and foremost, as Commander-in-Chief, they're keeping us safe. Thanks to Iowa Central. What an incredible facility, what an incredible building. Just thank you, Rusty McNeil, who is the facilities and broadcast head here. Rusty, I don't know if you're here, but ask for a raise. You've done a tremendous job. Thank you very much. So, also, MediaCom. Be on your best behavior because you are being televised. We're proud to have a partnership with MediaCom. Every one of our APPS forums in Iowa is going to be broadcast statewide. So no Iowan, no matter where you find yourselves, can engage in these important issues. And it will also be on demand system. So our program, we're going to have about 20 minutes of moderated discussion between our moderator and Governor Christie, where they will have an in-depth conversation about the challenges facing the world right now and what Governor Christie would do as President of the United States. After that 20-minute session, we've got about 25 to 30 minutes available to hear questions from Iowans. I have been amazed at the questions that were submitted when each of you registered to attend tonight. It shows, again, that Iowans understand the serious challenges this nation faces from all corners of the globe. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's moderator. Tonight's moderator is Jean Meserve. Jean is, she defines Homeland Security and Foreign Affairs reporting. She covered the Homeland Security beat for CNN from the September 11th attacks through the 10th anniversary. Prior to that, she was the State Department correspondent for ABC News, where she reported from China, the Middle East, and Europe. She is a senior fellow at the George Washington University Homeland Security Institute, and she is a member of the Aspen Institute's Homeland Security Advisory Board. Please join me in giving a great Hawkeye State welcome to Jean Meserve, tonight's moderator. And now someone who certainly needs no introduction to Iowans. He has been a friend to Iowans over his years, a great friend to our Governor Terry Branstad, someone who was the 55th governor of New Jersey, elected in 2009 and elected again in 2013. And let me tell you, as somebody that used to run a state political party, New Jersey's a lot tougher terrain to win elections than it was even here in Iowa, so that's saying something. He served as U.S. Attorney and the lead prosecutor in New Jersey as an appointee from the President George W. Bush administration from 2002 to 2008. He is somebody that is known for making tough decisions, known for being a fighter, known for telling it like it is. Please join me in giving a great North Central Iowa welcome to the Governor of New Jersey, presidential candidate, Governor Chris Christie.
Governor, welcome. And
Thank you.
thank you to all of you for joining us tonight. Congressman Rogers could not be with us here tonight, but he sent me some questions. So
Right.
since he's our host, he gets the first question tonight. His question is this. FBI Director Comey said last month that the federal government does not have the ability to conduct thorough background checks on the Syrian refugees who may be allowed into this country. So the congressman asked, will we be able to address the security concerns while still retaining our tradition of being a welcoming place for refugees?
Not at the moment. We won't. I mean, the fact is we have to make a choice. If the FBI director says that we cannot appropriately vet these people, then my view is you can't admit them until you can. And every effort should be made for us to be able to develop the wherewithal to do that. But I just don't believe at this time in our history that what we should be doing is rolling the dice. And now, I know Jim Comey really well. We worked together. I was U.S. Attorney in New Jersey when he was U.S. Attorney in Manhattan in the immediate aftermath of September 11th. He was then my boss as Deputy Attorney General of the United States. And, you know, his word on this means a great deal to me, not just because of the position he holds, but more importantly because of how well I know him. So no, I would not admit Syrian refugees now until we could appropriately vet them.
Is it possible to ever appropriately vet them? There are people with no documentation, with false documentation, with multiple passports. Nobody's stamping your passport when you're going in and out of Syria and Iraq.
Yep, certainly not right now. And I think it'd be very difficult, very problematic to be able to do it. But I do think that we continue to gather more and more information about these folks as time goes on. We're doing that both in a national security context and an intelligence context. And so I wouldn't say it's impossible to do it. And I think you can continue to process people, and there's some that you will be able to clear. But the idea that the president wants to increase the amount of refugees we take tenfold. In the last year, we've admitted about 1,700 Syrian refugees. He wants to increase that to 10,000 and do it over the next 6 months.
So let me ask you this. You gave a very impassioned speech not long ago about a friend of yours who had died of opioid addiction. It was very moving to many people who saw it. I'm just curious how you react when you see a picture like the picture of that young toddler on the beach, a refugee child who didn't make it.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. It really is. And the fact is that there are things that we could do right now to make it safer in Syria, which the president should have done a long time ago. We could work with our NATO allies to set up a no-fly zone. We could set up a safe zone within Syria with NATO troops to be able to keep Syrians in Syria. The president's made the decision he doesn't want to do that. I would be much more willing to do that to help to save the lives of young people like that. And let's remember something else. The president made a real, wisecrack after I made the comments I made, that he said, there's some tough guys in the Republican race who are afraid of widows and orphans, implying, that women or children would never be involved in terrorist activity. We now know from San Bernardino just a couple of days ago that women are very capable of being involved in terrorist activity. And the widow who comes over here from Syria, if aligned with ISIS or another organization, could create just as much death as any man, given the weapons that are available now. So, the president, he likes to get a cheer from the UN crowd. He's looking maybe to get his second worthless Nobel Peace Prize. But I'm not looking to put American lives at risk to help him to get that.
So you're a big fan of the NSA surveillance program, which was discontinued on Sunday.
Yep.
It was in place until Sunday, and yet it did not pick up this couple in San Bernardino. It isn't the cure to everything, is it? No. And how do we find those people who are inspired by ISIS, but as far as we can determine thus far, not connected with them?
There is no one intelligence capability that's going to be the cure to everything. There's no one silver bullet. But the question is, during a time of increasing danger, do we want to decrease the tools we have? I mean, that doesn't make any sense to me. And the fact is that what the president did, and not just
the Congress did.
Well, I was going to get to that. It's not just the president, but you have two other people who run on the Republican side for president who voted to take away this authority. Senator Cruz and Senator Paul both voted to take away that authority. And Senator Paul and I had a very spirited conversation about this in the first presidential debate, you might remember, back in Cleveland. And he, contended I was overreacting to the threat. I think after Paris, And now after San Bernardino, I think Senator Paul is the one, and Senator Cruz, who have an explanation that they owe to the American people.
So you would push to restore that program.
Absolutely.
What else would you do? You said it's not a magic bullet.
No.
How else would you beef up intelligence?
Listen, part of what you need to do is not only beef up the tools, but give confidence to the men and women who are doing the job that they're going to be backed up.
You don't think they have that now?
No, I don't. And I think it began with some of the rhetoric the president and his people have used over time, and concluded with that report that the Senate Democrats put out at the end of last year, which in essence accused people in the intelligence community of engaging in crimes, when in fact all those people in the intelligence community were authorized by the United States Justice Department to do the things that they did in the post 9/11 era. When you do those kind of things to folks who are operating in a dirty and dangerous world to begin with, and you make them feel as if they go out and do what needs to be done, that they're criminals, you're killing the morale of folks in the intelligence community. And I've had a number of
But
intelligence
this
officers.
isn't just about morale.
Well, no, it's not. We just talked about the NSA metadata program that I would restore. It is also about morale, though. It's absolutely about morale. And it's about law enforcement morale as well, and law enforcement tools that are necessary to be able to do this.
So
President
what
Bush,
additional tools would you give?
I'm not saying we need additional tools, Gene. Let's restore the tools that we had. With those tools that we had, for the 7 years after 9/11, we did not have another major terrorist attack on American soil. And let's remember, the San Bernardino attack is now the largest loss of life, American life, on American soil from a terrorist attack since September 11th. I don't believe it's a coincidence that we have a president who has been unwilling to acknowledge Islamic jihadist activity. But he's still today, as of today, can you imagine this? What if on September 11th, in the days after September 11th, it wasn't President George W. Bush sitting behind the desk in the Oval Office who said, this is a terrorist attack on America, but it was the FBI director in New York. Because the FBI director in Los Angeles is the one who announced this was a terrorist investigation, not the President of the United States. The President of the United States will still not have those words come out of his mouth, nor will Hillary Clinton. I mean, this matters, everybody. It matters.
But what are you going to do? That's what,
Well,
that's past, let's look forward.
Well, listen,
We just had San
I
Bernardino,
love-
it wasn't detected.
I love the fact when people say, well, that's past. Whenever it's something bad for the Obama administration, well, let's not worry about that.
No, I'm
That's
not saying
past.
that at all.
And no,
But
that's
the
what gets
point of
put to
the forum
Republicans.
is to figure out what you're going to do as
Yeah.
president.
Well, I just told you what I'm going to do. I'm going to enhance the capabilities of the intelligence community. I'm going to enhance the capabilities of the law enforcement community. We're going to support them at every turn and give them the resources that they need. If Jim Comey comes to me and says, you know what, Mr. President, if you give me X percentage more FBI agents in my terrorists, X percentage more in technology, I'll be able to do even better. I assume that's what I'm going to hear, given what the president has done to the budgets of the FBI and the CIA and the NSA during his time as president. So there's lots of different things we can do, Gene, that don't involve a new technology, new gadget, or gizmo. It's about more people, because this is not only an electronic intelligence issue, it's a human intelligence issue. And it's not just human intelligence here in the homeland, it's human intelligence around the world as well.
And what do we do about that? Here we have the Europeans, and we have just seen in Paris that their security system is full of significant gaps, and we have a visa waiver program. 38 countries, including most of the European countries, can send people to this country without any interview at an American embassy.
Yep.
What do we do?
Well, listen, this is part of the conversation that an assertive American president would be having with the allies right now to be able to do it, and he's not doing
in
that.
fairness, President Obama did tighten up the visa waiver program to some degree in the past week, and Congress is considering legislation.
Except the problem is that it's not just what happens with us, it's what they're doing in the European Union. So the president goes to Europe to talk about this? No. The president goes to Europe to talk about climate change, because that is the moral imperative and challenge of our time. While Parisians are being slaughtered in theaters and on the streets and cafes, this president decides to spend his political capital on climate change. I'll guarantee this, Gene, the 230,000 slaughtered Syrians, they're not worried about climate change right now.
Don't you think
They're
the
not worried
president
about
can
climate
walk
change.
and chew gum at the same time?
On
Can
this
he do
president,
both?
I see no evidence of that.
I want to put push you just a little bit on the climate change issue, because for years, the military and intelligence community in this country has been saying that climate change is a national security issue. And several former leaders in the space, including former directors of the CIA, former heads of the State Department, have just signed a letter saying so and saying we should act, because this does pose a long-term threat to the United States as opposed to the near-term and long-term ISIS.
Key part of the question there, right? When you talk about a president being able to walk and chew gum at the same time, part of what that is setting priorities. It is completely out of whack after Paris for the president to go ahead with this climate change conference.
The Parisians went ahead. France was hosting it and went ahead.
So wait a second now. Am I supposed to be taking national security leads from the Parisians?
No,
I mean, seriously.
but if it's a priority for anybody, wouldn't it be for the president of France?
Listen, I cannot judge whether the president of France has his priorities in the right order or not. That's up to him. But I can judge as an American citizen what the president of the United States should be doing. And here, this is extraordinary. When the attacks in Paris happened, the weekend after, I was watching one of the Sunday morning shows, and the Deputy National Security Advisor for the President of the United States was on, and they asked about Article 5, an invocation of Article 5 of the NATO treaty, which is an attack on one is an attack on all. And they said, what's the President's position on invocation of Article 5? The answer was, we want to see what Paris does. Now, I have to tell you something. I didn't think I'd live long enough to find an American president on an issue of a threat to NATO that says, let's see what France does. Because France has always been such a leader in these issues. Well, it's true. I mean, you know, the fact is that America leads NATO if we have a president who's willing to lead. But once again, this president's going to be the last person in authority to announce that this is a terrorist attack. And I guarantee you, you won't hear Islamic jihadism come out of his mouth. Won't say it. You know, leadership by euphemism is a problem. And the fact is that this president won't say those words, and neither will Mrs. Clinton, because they're worried about being, you know, popular with the politically correct crowd. I have the second largest Muslim population in America in my state. Only Michigan has more Muslim Americans in their state than New Jersey does. Muslim Americans in New Jersey are not confused when you say radical Islamic jihadism. They don't think I'm talking about the guy who owns the corner store or who works in the company down the street who, you know, absolutely acts peacefully in the conduct of his religion, raises his family, and works hard. He doesn't think I'm insulting him because he knows he's not a radical Islamic jihadist. But if we don't use those words, those euphemisms create more confusion than they create clarity, except the president doesn't want to get involved in that because heaven forbid that he should speak clearly about these things.
So information sharing clearly has been part of our intelligence posturing and will continue to be. How far can we take that with the Europeans when they have privacy concerns that are different than ours?
Well, those are things that have to be negotiated. But I think
they've been trying to negotiate it.
I
The Bush
understand
administration tried to negotiate it.
I understand that too, Gene. But you know what? We're in a different world right now. Their concerns may become.
We'd had attacks in London and in Madrid.
Yeah, this is different. This is different now because what's happened now is an organization like ISIS that is now no longer looking for symbolic type of attacks like Al-Qaeda, was generally the kind of organization that was looking for big symbolic attacks. Here's the problem for us now. ISIS just wants American blood, along with the blood of others who disagree with them. If a Center for the Developmentally Disabled in San Bernardino, California, is now a terrorist target, that means every place in America is a terrorist target. And every place in France, or Great Britain, or Germany, any of the other Western European countries is a target. I think this is a new context. And I think it will be easier to negotiate information sharing in light of the privacy concerns in light of this new context. Now, I could be wrong, but it's also about who's negotiating and how you're leading and all the rest. But I'm optimistic that given this new context, if we're aggressive about it, we'll be able to come to agreements.
They don't even have in the European Union a common database for sharing information about people who are suspected of terrorism.
Yeah, it's very true. They're well behind us. And that's why America has to lead and push for them to do those things. And I think, now that there has been European blood spilled, the imperatives become much different. Look at all the different things that France has done since the attacks that you would have thought before those attacks.
On a
they would
temporary
never do.
basis.
I understand that. But they never even did that on a temporary basis before after attacks in London or in Spain or in other places across Europe. France never was willing to do those things even on a temporary basis. So there is a mood change, and we have to acknowledge that mood change, and we now have to move people towards those changes, some of them at least, that are sensible, being long-term permanent solutions.
So we've been talking about defensive strategy. What do you do offensively about ISIS?
Well, I think, first off, you need to understand how well-financed they are.
Very well.
Both from oil money and from the looting of Iraqi banks as they pillage their way through that country.
It's the most well-financed, non-governmental army the world has ever seen.
Yep. And so part of what we need to do is disrupt that financial network by going and attacking those oil fields and cutting off their ability to supply oil.
And that has begun.
Yep. But should have begun a long time ago. This is like, we turned over, after the Paris attacks, a number of ISIS targets to the French. What I immediately thought was, why hadn't we attacked them already? If we had this list of targets that were, according to the administration, high-quality ISIS targets, why were we sitting on them? And why did we give them to the French? I mean, I have no problem with the French making those attacks once we gave them to them. But why were we sitting on them? It's because this president believes, and listen, I got in the back and forth about Jeff Goldberg about this in an interview that got published today. So I'm going to use the language that the President of the United States uses. His philosophy, his governing philosophy in the White House is, don't do stupid That's the administration's philosophy. That's what they said. And I said, well, for an administration who has that as their governing philosophy, they've done plenty of stupid stuff, right? And the fact is, to sit on those targets is stupid. But what the president wants to do is to always err on the side of American inaction versus American action.
So what would you do?
Well, first off, I talked about a no-fly zone in Syria and a safe zone in Syria for Syrian refugees. And that needs to be done in accordance with our NATO allies, who I think will be ready now and prepared to be able to participate in that. On ISIS, we have to step up our attacks. Everyone needs to step up in a coordinated way, our attacks on them.
Boots on the ground?
Well, if we need to, yes.
U.S.?
Sure. As part of a broader coalition, not going it alone.
No one else wants to put their boots in there?
Well, you know what? That's yesterday, Gene. That's not today. And, also, this is about American leadership. It's about America going to these folks and convincing them and making the case. The president makes the exact opposite case every day. All he says, no boots on the ground, no boots on the ground. Well, if the American presidents continue to say that, if you're the president of France or the chancellor of Germany or the prime minister of Great Britain, Great Britain wasn't bombing ISIS targets either until until a few days ago. And then the parliament came through and passed the authority for them to bomb ISIS targets. Circumstances change when people see innocent people slaughtered. And so we can't sit back and say, well, that's the way it was before, so why try? And the president hasn't changed his position, though.
Well, he says he's putting more special operations forces in.
Yeah, I think 150 now.
Well,
I mean,
we've watched small SEAL teams have a big impact.
Yeah, small SEAL teams can have a big impact, but not against what you just called the most well-financed private army in recent history. 150 special ops, no matter how talented, brave, and crafty they are, 150 aren't going to do the job. Now, the question is, though, we don't want to see America get involved in another situation where we're an occupying force in the midst of the Middle East by ourselves, because that's what Iraq really became over a period of time. And so the question becomes, how do you do this? And you need to get greater buy-in from our allies. The problem is that our allies are skeptical because they can't count on America's word anymore. They just can't. This president doesn't keep his word.
Well, they also have greatly reduced their defense budgets.
They have, as have we. As have we. And the president has been a major driver, along with sequestration, and the way he implemented sequestration, in making sure that we now have an army that's the smallest it's been since 1940, and a navy that's the smallest it's been since World War I. So
still very
everybody has
much the
problems.
largest army in the world.
Absolutely, but that's not the rationale for going it alone. And the fact is, we need to say to these folks, are you engaged in this war or are you not?
And so do we welcome the Russians as part of this coalition?
Well, no, because the Russians have no interest in ISIS. I mean, let's be realistic. The Russians have no interest in ISIS. The Russian commercial airliner was taken down 3 or 4 weeks ago. Have we seen a major Russian attack on ISIS yet?
I think we've seen more.
Yeah.
But
Let me
yes,
ask you
against
this.
others,
Right.
as well.
What's happened is Putin will every once in a while throw a couple of bombs the ISIS way while he is slaughtering the rebels in Syria to prop up Assad and to keep Assad in power so he has a client state in the Middle East, and the Iranians can help to extend Shia power across the region. So my problem with Putin at the moment is you cannot count on him as a reliable ally against ISIS. Now, those circumstances can change too, based upon how much we're willing to push him, what we're willing to do in other areas to incentivize him. But right now, his main goal in the Middle East is to keep Assad in power.
And what do you think about keeping Assad in power? Must he go? And if he does, then what?
I think that's the big problem. And that's the problem with the president waiting as long as he did to do anything in Syria and threatening to do something and then not doing it. I mean, here's part of the problem why people don't believe the president in the Middle East anymore. It's because he said if Assad uses chemical weapons against his people in Syria, we'll act. And I don't think that what the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Jordanians, the Egyptians thought the president meant by acting was calling Putin and asking for help to come and negotiate a deal for him with Assad. And so, I had an ambassador from a friendly Arab country say to me 6 months ago, he said, Governor, when we used to have problems in the Middle East, America was our 911 call. He said, now when we dial 911, we get voicemail. And so...
Was that ally Saudi Arabia by any chance?
It was not Saudi Arabia.
And
but
where are they?
It wasn't Saudi Arabia, and that's the only game of elimination we're going to play on this game.
And where are they, by the way, in all of this?
Oh, listen.
They're worried about Yemen.
By the way, the Saudis are distracted by Yemen. They're significantly distracted by Yemen. But this is what happens when America doesn't have a strategic vision for the region and leading the world. We allow everybody to go off and battle their own little battle of choice.
Do you ever estimate how much influence the U.S. can have in this situation?
No, I don't. I've watched our country over time have enormous influence. It doesn't mean that we're going to straighten out the Middle East, and I don't care to be marriage counselor in the Middle East. But what we're seeing right now is the cost of American inaction. We have chaos everywhere. Remember, Secretary Clinton said if we got rid of Mubarak and Gaddafi, the Middle East would have an Arab Spring and we'd have a much more stable place. How'd that turn out exactly? So I'm not jumping to get rid of Assad, but what I'm saying is that Assad is part of the reason ISIS has been created and gotten stronger. It's Assad's conduct against his own people that is helping to inspire ISIS and get even greater recruits because of the cruelty and the butchery of Assad.
Let's face it, it's also hatred of America.
Well, there's no question that's part of it, but I would tell you that I think from a really fueling that movement, that the butchery that has gone on every day in Syria for years, and hundreds of thousands of people killed, and millions of people who are fleeing because they can't survive there, those people are much more incentivized to radicalism by that than they are by some generalized hatred of America. And so Assad is a problem. But because we've let it go so long, I don't have an easy answer to that one, Gene. I really don't. I mean, I wish I'd tell you that I feel like, okay, well, if in fact we get rid of Assad, then what happens next? I'm concerned about that. But I don't think you leave a butcher like that in place because you're concerned about what the alternative is. But it is a very complicated...
But it didn't work in Iraq.
I understand. Listen.
Yeah.
But by the way, it was working in Iraq until the president pulled the troops out. And the fact is that while
And the
Iraq went
Iraqis
up
wanted
perfect-
them out.
Well, of course the Iraqis wanted, that government wanted them out. But the fact is we invested a heck of a lot in lives and in fortune to provide stability in Iraq. And they don't get to choose themselves. Once we've invested that much, they don't get to just say, okay, well, now you all have to leave. No.
They don't get to choose?
No.
The Iraqis don't get to choose? What
Iraqi-
happens in Iraq?
No, the Iraqis don't get to choose what happened in Iraq because of the war that occurred there, Gene, and because of the investment the American people made. And what's happened since then? When we pulled all the troops out, the Iraqi government has disintegrated. ISIS has taken over large parts of the country. We have the conflict that the Kurds are engaged in as well. And, President Bush predicted this would happen. Back in 2007, if troops were unilaterally and quickly pulled out of there.
But this was also partially his decision.
But wait a second. Well, I'm happy to get into that, okay? I've said that I don't believe President Bush, if he had known in 2003 what he knows today, would have got into Iraq. And I certainly would have. If I knew there were not weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, I would not have favored going into Iraq. And I don't think President Bush would have either. Now, sometimes a president can only act on the best intelligence that he gets. And he got that intelligence and he made the decision. And we all are much smarter in retrospect, much smarter. But do we devalue the investment that we made there even more by then not having a retention of force agreement in place with the Iraqis so that we could keep some there to keep stability for that government? Because now what we have is mayhem in Iraq. We have absolute mayhem in Iraq that has contributed to the rise of ISIS.
This great audience has submitted a whole bunch of questions.
All right.
I want to get to some of them. And some of them have to do, surprisingly, with Iraq.
There you go.
Why are we not helping the Kurds more? This is from Nora Waller in Fort Dodge.
We should be helping the Kurds more. This is a philosophical decision by the president. This is delicate work, as you know, because of our relationship with the Turks.
Who do not like the Kurds.
Yes, and they're part of our NATO alliance. But the fact is that the Kurds are like the 51st state. I mean, if you want to talk about allies in that region, the Kurds love America and really support Americans. So we need to find a way to help the Kurds to be able to defend themselves in a very dangerous place.
Can you be specific?
Well, I think providing them with more arms and more technology is not a bad thing to do. Now, we've got to do it by being sensitive to our Turkish allies. There's things they want from us, too. Trades can be made all the time. That's what happens in foreign policy.
Andrew Bergquist asks, what's your view on veterans going to Iraq and working with the Kurds?
Veterans?
Veterans.
Listen, this is a free and open society. People can do much of what they want to do. I don't think that should be a coordinated policy of the American government, though, no.
Tracy Crimmins asks, what would be your first course of action in office to directly let ISIS know that you're the new man in charge?
My election would tell them that.
But what about
and it would
action?
Listen, the kind of campaign that I am running, and I've been talking about this issue as much or more than anyone, probably myself and Senator Graham, as much or more than anybody in this race, would send them a message much more important than anything I could say. It would say the American people are ready for a different style of leadership and a different approach to this. A president can speak for the American people, and should, but the American people's resolve is an even stronger tool for a president to use. I've already outlined some of the things that I think need to be done. I have no hope that they will be done between now and January 20th of 2017 by this president. So I think this entire mess, and probably worse, is going to be left on my desk for them, but that's okay. I'm used to that. I became governor of New Jersey after 8 years of a Democratic governor, so there were lots of messes left on my desk that I had to clean up before.
A lot of questions here about ISIS here. Catherine Averill from Fort Dodge asks, my son attends Iowa State University. He's often in crowds of people on campus, and it worries me. Colleges and universities have been targets of terrorism in the past. Do you have any specific plans on how to protect young Americans?
No specific plans on how to protect young Americans any different than middle-aged Americans or senior citizens. We're all Americans. And the fact is that under the current circumstances, colleges and universities very well could be targets.
They have been.
Right? And they have been before, and they could be again. And development. Listen, what is the rationale for folks who have pledged allegiance to ISIS to attack a center where the developmentally disabled are treated? I mean, what's the message they're trying to send?
It appeared, correct me if
Well,
I'm wrong, but the latest I read is they don't think this was ISIS directed. This was
No,
ISIS
I-
inspired,
Right.
and it
Well,
was
that's
up
what
to
I said.
these two
People who have-
individuals.
I said, what's the rationale of people who have pledged their allegiance to ISIS, which is what this woman did on a Facebook page? Why is that? My point to you is that there is no logic or rationality to it. So defending something like that becomes even more difficult, because we're thinking in a logical and rational way, trying to combat people who are thinking illogically and irrationally. And that's why the collection of intelligence, of significant data, and having folks who are doing that both from an electronic perspective and a human perspective become even more important. Because let's take Paris, for instance. You alluded to this before. This was an intelligence failure. I mean, These guys didn't get together 15 minutes before the attack at the Taco Bell, and say, hey, how are we going to do this? There are multiple people involved across a number of countries in Europe. And the French intelligence missed it, and by the way, so did we. And so we have to go back and do a post-mortem on that and look at how we missed what we missed. And the same thing about San Bernardino, although I think that is going to have been much more difficult to have prevented than what happened in Paris.
I'm curious if I could see a show of hands. How many people here have any sort of emergency kits or emergency supplies in their homes in case there's some sort of incident? I see one, two, I see more hands than I expected to. The reason I ask this question is because the Department of Homeland Security has tried to inspire American citizens to keep their eyes and ears open and to get themselves ready, that we are all part of this effort to prevent terrorism in our country. It doesn't seem to have worked.
Yeah.
What's your criticism of the department, if any? And what do you have to say to American citizens about what they should be doing here?
You're going to find this unusual. I don't really have a criticism of the department on this.
You're the only person I know
Right?
who says that.
I mean, listen, I think that there's lots of things that the Department of Homeland Security could be doing to further raise the awareness on this. But in the end, I think, and this may be a bias from where I'm from in the country, but the fact is, I see widows and orphans every day from 9/11 still. They're in our parish, at our home, they're in our kids' schools. We never forget about what happened. And as a result, it leads us to be prepared. And so I think that part of the problem is, and I would lay this more than at the Homeland Security Secretary's feet, than at the President's, it's how you talk about these things. And old no-drama Obama may have seemed like a good idea in 2008 after all the years of President Bush. But what I tell you is that a president who's not talking about this stuff on a regular basis, when people hear from a president, it's much different than, I'd love to see a show of hands. How many people know who the Secretary of Homeland Security is? Who can name the Secretary of Homeland Security? All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people, right? Jay Johnson from New Jersey. Okay, but most Americans don't know, and quite frankly, no offense to Jay, they don't care what Jay's saying. They really don't. He doesn't have the megaphone. The bully pulpit is the President of the United States. And if the President wanted to have it be a priority, to have Americans be prepared, a couple of really well-placed national events where the President's talking about it and going back to places that were the subject of attack and talking about that, it would wake everybody up in the country to that thing. So I'm less concerned about the bureaucrats in Washington and whether they've got a new program or a new box to check about something to do than I am about the resolve that comes from the President of the United States about whether this should be a priority for the American people. I know that right after 9/11, everybody was thinking about it. And the President was talking about it on a regular basis. And so I hope we don't have to wait for something that's that cataclysmic for us to wake up again and know that we're part of both preparation to protect our families and prevention. Because see something, say something still should be the rule in this country, and we should be talking about it more.
We did talk about San Bernardino, but we have a question here from Jake Duarte who asks, what can be done to weed out ISIS members or sympathizers in the U.S.?
The only thing, as you know, Gene, is just greater intelligence gathering. I keep going back to that, but that's what
No
it is.
registration of Muslims?
No registration of Muslims, no.
Which was suggested by another candidate.
Yes, it was, and nor should we have registration of Catholics or Protestants or Jews or Buddhists or Hindus. I don't think we should have registration of anybody. Here's what I think. If you're going to register your religion, register it at your place of worship. And if you choose to worship peacefully, and worship in the spirit that you want to worship. And we should say that for everybody. And I think, listen, we know this is not a Muslim problem. This is a radical jihadist Muslim problem. And, I don't think that the registration of anyone is appropriate in our country. I think it runs against exactly what we're saying, and I think it's the kind of thing that smacks of, camps for Japanese during World War II, and I wouldn't want to get engaged in that.
Actually, somebody has a question that relates to that. Amy Kirsten Bruno asked, will you create a large refugee camp for Syrian refugees similar to the camps in Thailand in the late 70s, early 80s for Vietnamese refugees. All nations could help support it until proper screening was done. She doesn't specify whether this would be in the U.S. or whether it would be more along the lines of what you're talking about, of a safe space in Syria.
Yeah, someone volunteering Fort Dodge for that? You know, I mean, you want to talk about, people have a hard time, wanting to cite jails and prisons and citing other things. You want to cite a Syrian refugee internment camp? No, I think what we need to do is to make areas of Syria safe for Syrians and let them stay in their own country. I don't believe, when we can't properly vet them, that having them in internment camps in the United States is the way to go. I understand the American desire, and this is a laudable desire. There's the American desire to want to help. That's part of our ethos. It's part of who we are. But there has to also be a part of our ethos, which I know there is, about self-protection as well. And right now, I think we err on the side of self-protection in terms of having folks in our own country.
So how do you protect the border, asked Bennett O'Connor.
How do you protect the border? I will not go into stultifying detail here, but I'll go through a really quick 5-step plan. First, you build fencing or walling in places that are most populated on the border. I am not a 2,000-mile border wall man for a few reasons. One, because it's too expensive and ridiculous.
And it hasn't worked in all places.
No, of course it doesn't work, because now I hear there's going to be a door in the wall, too. A big, beautiful door where the good people can come through. I'm going to figure out who the good people are. I'm a little bit worried, but that's okay, the good people. And I hear that the Mexicans are going to pay for it. Well, let me just tell you, over the last 18 months, I've met twice with Mexican President Peña Nieto, once here in the United States, once on a trade mission to Mexico City. Smart guy, good guy, he's not paying for the wall. I guarantee, I don't care who asks him. I don't care whether he gets offered, a special luxury weekend at a special golf course somewhere. It's not going to happen, okay? But fencing and walling in heavily populated areas can be smart and a deterrent that we could use. Second, we need to, I think, embed FBI, DEA, and ATF agents with our Border Patrol at specific places along the border to interdict guns and drugs. They're the people that are most specialized in doing that work. No offense to our Border Patrol folks, but I think we need a greater presence by those folks on the border.
Where does the money come from?
Well, we'll get to that in a second, Gene. Third,
it's the biggest,
hardest question. I want to get
question.
through this. I will tell you. But third, we need to use technology more, both stationary cameras and drones that are equipped with cameras along the more remote ports of the border. It's too expensive to send human resources there. Let's use electronic resources that are very efficient and very cost-effective to do.
At least the first generation they put up didn't work very well.
Well, yeah, I understand, but the technology gets better and improves all the time. Before you know it, all your Amazon packages are going to be delivered by drone. That's going to be a wonderful time. Fourth, we need to improve the visa program in this country. 40% or more of the 11 million people, or 12 million, or 10 million, whichever number you want to use, who are here without proper documentation, didn't come in over the southern border. They came in through the airports on a tourist visa, on a student visa, on a temporary work visa, and then we lose track of them. Now, I got in all kinds of interesting conversation when I said in Iowa about 5 months ago, if Federal Express can track a package from the time it leaves your doorstep till the time it gets to the doorstep you want and tell you every step of the way, it's in the warehouse, it's in the truck, now it's on the plane, it's off the plane, it's in another truck.
It has a barcode on it.
Right. Yes, it does. And you know who else has barcodes on them? Every human being, right here. I don't need to put a new barcode on it. And that's why when the press said, I went on CNN, and I had a woman say to me, Governor, your plan sounds like you want to put chips in people when they come over the border. And I said, no, I don't. Well, then do you want to slap them with barcodes on their foreheads, on their arms, where? And I looked at her, I said, you have 10 barcodes right here, 10, that are unique to every individual. What I say on the visa program is, every person who comes on the visa gives their thumbprint. The thumbprint goes into a database, and when you want to access services as a person who has a visa and is here on a visa, you have to give that thumbprint. And if it shows up on the system that you've overstayed your visa, we tap you on the shoulder and tell you it's time to go home. It's like all of us had Thanksgiving last week. I'm sure you invited folks to your home for Thanksgiving. This would be like you invited them to home for Thanksgiving, then Saturday, you decide to go upstairs and take care of the guest room, and they're still there. Like, hey man, I just invited you for Thanksgiving. What are you still doing here? But we do that enormously in this country. A biometric system to be able to do that makes sense and will help us to stop to adding to that number. Last is E-Verify. Folks come here to work. They don't come here to vote, they come here to work. Go ahead, what do you want to interrupt me on E-Verify? Go ahead.
It hasn't worked very well.
Well, because we haven't forced businesses to use it.
There weren't photographs involved.
Right, and that's why the biometric system makes sense. And, by the way, we also have a situation where there's no penalties of any consequence. We have to recognize that American employers are creating some of this problem. When they want to hire cheaper labor that's illegal to increase their profits, they're helping to create this problem. So we can't just say it's those people alone who are creating the problem. It's not. We're creating the problem too. So my idea is to fine anyone who hires someone illegally, double the amount of money that they've made off the person. Business is in the business of making money. And if it no longer is a moneymaker for them, they're not going to do it. And a lot of people who are here just to work will leave on that basis. That's the way you secure the border. Now, I haven't forgotten that Gene asked me how we're going to pay for it. Part of the way we will pay for it is that I'm the only person in this race, still, shockingly to me, in December, that's put forward an entitlement reform plan. The only person. And our entitlement reform plan will save $1.2 trillion over the next 10 years. That will not only solidify those entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security and Disability, but it will free up money for us to invest in greater defense and greater intelligence capabilities for our country. So, you know, unlike everybody else who might sit in this chair, our plan is not only specific, but it's already been scored by CBO, so it's not me magically scoring it somehow and coming up with a number.
And what do you do about the people who are already here?
Listen, I think that's going to have to be something that's going to be taken care of over time. Don't believe anybody, by the way, who tells you that they're going to deport 11 million people in 2 years. I want you to understand what that means. Okay, now I've done law enforcement for 7 years, overseeing customs and immigration and customs enforcement, overseeing border patrol as a U.S. attorney. That means 15,000 deportations a day, every day, for 2 years. I want you to understand that at every level of government, from the federal down to your local police force, in the United States, the average number of arrests per day are 27,000 across the entire country. That means we're going to increase it more than 50%. Who's doing it exactly? How many more officers at the federal, state, and local level we're going to have to hire to do that? And I want you to also think about something. What's it going to look like? Because it's not going to be done like in a way that's sterile. Right? We've heard one of the candidates say, oh no, the good people are going to be able to come right back in. How do you know who the good people are? And who's deciding who the good people are? Man, if I was one of those people who thought I was a good person, and all of a sudden I got to judge the bad person, I would be pretty worried. And so don't believe these easy answers. Over the course of time, if you use E-Verify correctly, a lot of those folks who currently are here to work, who would not be able to work, will leave on their own. Because the only reason they're here, they're not here to vote, like Hillary Clinton thinks. They're actually here to work. They don't care. Many fewer of them care less about voting. They care about working and supporting their families and sending money back to their home countries to be able to help their family back there. If the jobs aren't here, they're not going to come. So we're part of the creation of the problem, but I am not a person who believes that you're going to be having forced deportation of 11 million people over 2 years. It doesn't work. It's not going to work, and it will be ungodly expensive to do it because of all the officers you're going to have to hire. Talk about an over 50% increase in arrests a day, every day, for 2 years. It sounds great, everybody. I love when people stand up on the stage and say, don't you worry, it's going to be done, it's fabulous, it's perfect, it's going to be done. It's not. It's not.
The Secretary of Defense said yesterday that women will now have access to all combat roles in the U.S. military. Do you think that women are up to some of the really tough jobs, let's say in the infantry?
Many women I know are.
They're all doing CrossFit.
You know, yeah, listen, I think that this is an individual judgment for women who join the military. Now, you know, we have women at West Point, and Annapolis, in the Air Force Academy. I don't think we want to limit what they can do. If they've had the same type of training, which they do, and the same type of challenges that they face in becoming some of the most elite members of the military, then I understand that it creates some issues and some problems, but I have to tell you, I think that if a woman is determined and wants to do something, I have a pretty determined wife who, there weren't physical limitations, but, she was 30 years ago getting into the investment banking business on Wall Street. There were barely any women involved in that. She was determined to do it. Now, it's not the same physical challenges we're talking about combat, but I think much of this happens between the ears. And if a woman is really determined to want to be a top flight member of an infantry unit, I think most women would be able to get themselves to the point where they could.
One of the real concerns in some quarters is that standards will be lowered in order to give women access.
Well,
do you worry about that?
No, I would. As commander-in-chief, I wouldn't permit it. Right. So the point is that what I'm saying is I think women can meet the standards. If they can't, they can. Like if you can't meet the standard to do the job, then a man couldn't do it either. I mean, if there's a certain standard and certain men want to be in the infantry and they can't meet the physical standard to be able to do the job, they shouldn't be in the infantry either. So to me, that's social engineering. I'm talking about opportunity. I want my daughter, my two daughters, to have every opportunity that every man has. And I tell my daughters all the time that their life should never be dependent upon any man. Never. Your livelihood, your intellect, your sense of self-worth should not be determined by any man. You should be able to do whatever it is you want to do if you're willing to work hard enough. I'm going to support you to get there. So my philosophy on this is about opportunity. But I would not want to put my thumb on the scale for any of my daughters to be able to get them someplace, because then I'm affecting their self-worth. Because when they find out that dad put the old thumb on the scale, they're going to think that they're not worthy. I want them to earn what they get, and I want them to have every opportunity to do anything they want to do.
There's another issue that some of our audience members asked about, and that's cybersecurity. It's a big one. It's a tough one. Government systems, corporate systems, personal data, all under attack every day. How do we stop it?
Yeah, this is an enormous problem. I'm personally affected by it at the moment in two different ways. I'll tell you two quick stories. One, I got a piece of mail the other day from the Office of Personnel Management in the federal government. It's the place that maintains all of your records if you've been a federal employee of a certain level of security clearance, which I was when I was U.S. Attorney. I was informed in this nice little perforated note, like you know those things you get from the bank, you rip off the edges and then open it up, and you're hoping there's a check in there, but there's not.
No such luck.
Right, no such luck. I open it up, and you know what it tells me? That the Chinese now have my social security number and my fingerprints.
How's your bank account?
Well, how about this? Before that even happened, this is a really good story that I don't know if I've ever told publicly before, but this was in, I want to say it was early 2013, spring of 2013. I was in Boston to have dinner with Mitt Romney. And my wife knew I was having dinner with Mitt, and that there was a certain time window that I was going to be having dinner with him. So we're sitting at this restaurant, and my phone starts ringing. And I look down, and it's my wife, and I'm like, oh, God, I can't believe she knows I'm at dinner with Mitt Romney. What's she doing? So I hit ignore, right? Then it rings again.
Dangerous.
Right? Then it rings again. I'm like, oh, come on, man. I hit ignore one more time. 30 seconds later, it rings again. I said, Mitt, Mary Pat's trying to call me. Maybe there's something going on with the kids. I got to walk away. So I walk away from the table, and she said to me, somebody has gotten all your personal information, including our home phone number. She said, the phone is ringing off the hook with random people just saying, is this really Chris Christie's house? Does Chris Christie really live there? And she keeps hanging up, and it keeps calling and calling and calling. And she said, somebody's gotten your information. A few minutes later, I get a call from my security detail. And they tell me that all my personal information has been put up on the internet. My social security number, my home address, my home phone number, everything. So I get back to the table and I say to Mitt, I'm like, wow, you can't believe this. I tell him what happened. He said, God, this is awful. I'm like, yeah. So I said, we got to kind of cut dinner short. I got to go deal with this stuff. And he said, no problem. So we pay the check and I leave. I go back to the hotel and I find out from my security detail the website that my stuff is on. So I go onto the website, and guess who else's stuff is on there? Mitt Romney. Right? So I call him back, and I'm like, hey, Mitt, your stuff's on here too, man. And he's like, what? And I said, let me tell you, you got a lot more to lose than I have. So I get all over it really quickly. It is an enormous problem. That website had all different kinds of quote-unquote celebrities that someone had hacked in and gotten this information. In New Jersey, we've set up, we're the first of the states to work in conjunction with Homeland Security to set up a special task force that's funded by state and federal money to work with, it's called an ICAC. Don't ask me what it stands for, I don't remember. But it's about internet safety and security where the private sector and the public sector work together to find the holes.
We're almost out of time, so what do you do as president?
Here's the problem. As president, you're going to have to engage the private sector in this much more than the government can do it.
They're not very happy with the government right now.
I understand they're not, but I'm going to charm them to death, Gene. I got a lot of friends in Silicon Valley who've been very supportive of me over time, and I'm going to charm them on this because in the end,
Are you going to get encryption taken care of too while you're at it?
Well, that'll be part of the agenda. Because if we're allowing everything to be encrypted and we can't find a way to find out what's going on, then all these terrorist plots we're talking about will be conducted on the dark web, and we won't be able to find out anything that's going on. So it's a serious issue. But here's what I'd say to all of you. It can happen to anybody. It can happen to me. Identity theft happens every day. And I would really take the steps that are necessary to do the most you can to protect. I'll give you an example. After that, and I'm not shilling for this company. I have no interest in it. It just seems, from my research, to have been the best company. It's called LifeLock, right? And so I went and got this thing to protect me afterwards. Last week alone, I got 2 calls from them from people who were trying to open up cellular phone accounts in my name with my old information. And they hear about it, they call me. I had to get on the phone with those companies, tell them, no, it's not me. It's happening every day. You wind up getting credit problems and all kinds of other things. So we need to take steps now that we live in this online world to protect ourselves, because once it happens to you, take my word for it, it's a nightmare. I mean, it still hits me. That was spring of 13. So we're talking 2.5 years ago, and I'm still dealing with ramifications for that identity theft. And that's before the Chinese got my fingerprints. Wait till you see what's going to happen after that. My fingerprints are going to show up in places that I don't want them to, I'm worried about.
Governor Christie, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much for your time today. It's been great. Thank you. Thank you for your great questions. I've done 5 of these for this organization. You guys had the best questions yet. Congratulations. Super.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight.